So now that we've got our library BGL created, we need to find some method to place those individual objects that are part of the library into the sim in a specific location and with a specific rotation and pitch and bank and so forth. There are a couple of ways to do it, both of them a little wonky. We used to be able to use this wonderful program called Instant Scenery. Anybody who's done scenery work for FS 2004, FSX would be familiar with it, or even earlier versions of p3d. And you could essentially just place the objects visually in the sim by selecting your object, click in place, and then you could drag it around and change its rotation really easily and whatnot. It was just a really intuitive, useful tool for this kind of thing. But apparently with the jump to p3d4, which went 64-bit, it required a major rewrite of the program, and the author just hasn't been able to do it. It's been a couple of years now, and he still seems to be working on it. So I don't think it's good to count on that being ready anytime soon. So in the meantime, we got to find another way to place things in a sort of as visual an environment as we can get, so we can really easily see where things need to go. And there are a couple of different tools that you can use to do that. One of the ones that I've been using the most lately has been Airport Design Editor. It's relatively easy to deal with. It does require adding a background image and creating new libraries and whatnot. So let's open up the Dallas. Here's our Love Field project. And this is where you would normally configure your runways and taxiways and that sort of thing, which is great. But it also allows you to place library objects inside here, which is what these yellow boxes are. And you can see they're pretty good. You can see the footprints very nicely of the object. And that makes it pretty useful, especially if you have a fairly distinctive footprint on your object. For placing it in here, it's pretty easy to deal with. But the first thing you need before you do any of that is to get a good, well-calibrated background image. We're going to use the ortho photo that's available online here to lay down the background so we can see, in real time here, where all of these elements go, where the buildings go, where the taxiways and runways go and whatnot. And the way you do that, because it's Flight Sim Scenery Design, is you use another program. I'm going to use Scenery Builder X, S-Builder X, to create my background image. Go here to the Love Field project that I've already started. Now I'm going to hide this for a minute. Here, let's hide the maps. In fact, let's hide everything, and then let's show the background. And by using View Show Background, it's using whatever tile server you have set up to display. Let's see, where's the tool? There we go, tile servers. So this is using the Google satellite imagery, which I find in this case work pretty well. And then you just kind of zoom into the area that you want to use for your background. And what we want to do is we want to take this background image, which is just streaming from the online service right now. We want to turn it into a single image that we can use in Airport Design Editor and even in Blender, for that matter, to do our initial modeling. So from there, we want to go onto the File menu to Add Map, because that's what they call these images that are background images, is maps. And we're going to add it from background, so it's going to pull from what's displayed on screen right now. This dialog that comes up allows you to select what zoom level you want to choose it at, how sharp you want it to be, and how big. And you can also draw a little box around just the area that you want to include. So I'm going to choose the airport grounds here. I could go high. I mean, it shows you how many tiles, which is essentially what's in the little green boxes here, you'd be using at the various zoom levels. At zoom level 19, it's 97 by 100 tiles. That's a lot of tiles. 9,700 tiles is crazy. For just a background image, it's way overkill. In fact, I think I'm going to drop down to about 25 by 25, which is zoom level 17. 17 will give us a sharp enough image that we can see really clearly where to place things. Hit OK. You see there's a notice up here what it's processing, and then it either will give you a dialog saying it's finished and you hit OK, or it will just dismiss itself. And you'll see then that it switched off the background images and turned on the map view and created this background image. Now you could actually use this and compile it as a BGL, and it would be an orthophoto BGL that you could use in the simulator, except that it's using this Google data, which is actually off limits for commercial distribution or for any distribution, even freeware. So we're not going to bother with that step. What we've done now is we just created the image, and we've also, let me just hit save here, you can dismiss SBX. We've also created this wonderful text file that has our calibration data. So let me go to your root Scenery Builder X folder under Tools and Work, and you'll see two things if you organize by date modified right at the top here. You'll see a BMP image, which is the background image that we've just created, and what's really beautiful, you'll see a corresponding text file with the same name that has the north, south, and east and west coordinates for that image. And with those two bits of information, we're free and clear to go ahead and set things up in Airport Design Editor and make it accurate. So what I did in order to create this is went under, let's say, just right click, hit add image, choose the image that was created, and actually I did an intermediate step that I didn't show in this video, which is that I took my BMP file, I copied it and saved it into my models folder for my project, the Love Field project, and I converted it in Photoshop to a JPEG, because that reduces the file size quite a bit. And I find that Airport Design Editor is a little finicky about how big those files are. If they take up too much memory, they can slow things down. But using a JPEG and dialing down or dialing up the compression quite a bit, you can create a pretty small file. You can see that it was 141 megs for the original file. I got down to 6 megs. And at that rate, you really don't have much of an impact on performance at all. But you would normally select this, select the image, take the inner corner coordinates box, and then you'd use that latitude and longitude, top left and bottom right, so the northwest and the southeast corners, and by entering that information and hitting OK, it will be perfectly calibrated here so that it's the correct height and width to work with. And then you can see exactly where your footprints are for your buildings, where you're going to need to place things. From there, it's a matter of adding the object library that we've created. So that step we did earlier with Library Object Creator, we go under Tools to Library Object Manager, and we're going to add a new file. Let's use our Dallas library. This has all our downtown buildings in it. Hit Open. It found 24 objects and 0 that were already in the database. Click OK. And then this is a really, really important step. I've hung myself up on this a couple of times now. Click Save. If you don't hit Save, then the next time you come to this, it's not going to be available. It basically just dumps everything you just did from memory. So now that we've done that, we can add a new object by just right-clicking here, going to Add to a Library Object. And we're going to choose from our library here the Dallas library that we just added. And let's add one that's got a really distinctive footprint, like how about the Perot Museum? And hit Add. And you can see right here that you can see the outline of your building, and then you can place it exactly where it needs to be. Now this ortho doesn't include downtown Dallas, so there's no place to place this right now. And then if you wanted to you can just double click on it, and you can choose your heading here, so you could rotate it a little bit. Scale, pitch, and bank. I believe those all work now in p3d4, so you can use all those if you need to. I find you very seldom need to use anything but the rotation, though. The heading is really the only important thing. It's going to automatically put it at ground level by default. And just hit OK. And then when you go to compile this, Control C, there are under more options here. The only really important tick box that I do here is to choose compile separate airport and object BGL files. So that will separate your airport facilities data, which is runways and taxiways and parking and whatnot, from your object placement files. Just find that useful to keep those two separate. And essentially, when it compiles in the sim, you'll see all of your buildings, all of your library objects in the correct spot. And if you want to get rid of one, you just select it and hit delete. These are actually 4 groups of buildings rather than individuals. So that's one way to place objects. Another tool that you could use instead of Airport Design Editor is actually included with the prepared v4 install, and it's called SimDirector. It's basically a tool that was designed for creating scenarios, which are sort of like what we used to think of as missions back in the FSX world. It's as such, it's sort of overkill for placing scenery objects, but it does work. You just have to know a couple of simple things about it. Before you launch SimDirector, and please God, do this before you launch SimDirector, because for some reason SimDirector itself takes just an age to load. Like it took about 2 minutes from when I clicked the button to when this screen came up and when it loaded all of its libraries. And then once I go ahead and load my actual Dallas scenario, that's going to take even longer. So just bear in mind that basically what it's doing is running a copy of p3d inside of this tool. So you have to allow for the same sort of startup times that you would normally have with p3d. So if it takes you 10 minutes to start p3d, don't expect this to start any faster than that. What that means is you need to be pretty much ready for it. And so what you do is go into your p3d, go to your airport, get to whatever view you would normally start with in order to test an airport, and then save that scenario. Give it a really good descriptive name you'll be able to find later. And that is going to be the scenario that you use to place your objects with. So I'll give you an example here. Let's go up to the far top right here and click the Open Scenario folder icon. And I'm going to choose KDAL Testing. And then it will go ahead and load that just as if you were loading it in the sim. I should note here too, also as a sort of a part of your setup step, you need to make sure that your scenery, your library that you're going to use for placing objects is already loaded into the sim, that the scenery itself is added to the scenery library and whatnot. Basically, you need to be able to see your base scenery with your ortho imagery already in the sim before you launch SimDirector and do all this. So now I've loaded my my KDAL testing here. And what you see is an overhead view of the simulator, and you can use the middle mouse button to pan around. You can zoom in with the mouse wheel. It's pretty sensitive, so careful. And what you basically see here, this is my love field at the moment. I've placed these hangars. These are the ones that you saw in the Airport Design Editor, the yellow building footprints, so they're all along here. And then I also, by hand, placed these runways just as red planes right now, just for calibration in Blender. So what we can do is, let's move down to downtown here. Now, I've already used this to place a building, so it's going to be a little bit of a cheat. We can use the right mouse button to move the view around, and I can zoom in and see the downtown area, and you can rotate with the right mouse button and move the view up and down. Then as you zoom in, it gets closer to the ground, and you can see these are all buildings that I placed using SimDirector for downtown. And the way you place a new one, you go over here to this left hand pane and under scenery, so click the scenery button, And then this gives you all your scenery libraries. It doesn't filter, so you see every scenery library available to you in the sim. And let's choose Dallas Lib. And then what that will do, kind of like with ADE, is that will populate a list down here of all our individual objects listed by friendly name. And then you just, I'll pick our good old Perot Museum again, and kind of get away from any area that's already got objects in it. This is where it gets a little quirky. So make sure your screen is kind of flat. What's going to happen is you'll double click here, and it's going to make the object show up right in the middle of the screen. And you click on its little location tag here, and you could click and drag, left drag around, and get it exactly where it needs to be. Now I found that for some reason it just does weird things with orientation. So on the right hand panel here, set the pitch to 0, the bank to 0, and the heading to 0. Because when I designed these in Blender, I used a background image, so they should be in the right heading if it's set to 0. And then you just move them around until you see where they need to go. And this is already placed in here, but you can see it's kind of cool that you can move things around, that you can change the orientation of them and do whatnot, and be able to actually see it in the simulator. So that has a lot of value. That's not so different from how it used to work in instant scenery. And then once you've got everything placed the way you want, I'm going to delete this so I don't accidentally compile it. Hit the little save button in the far upper left, then under File, go to Export, and it'll give you a dialog here. You can name your placement file. Essentially everything you just placed in this one session is going to be included in this BGL file, but nothing that was already there before. So place as much as you can all in one fell swoop. Then hit Export, and what it'll do, you'll notice up here that it actually places the BGL in the prepared v4 files folder. It's in your documents, because it assumes that you're going to want any of these object placements to be used only with the scenario that you created before, the file that you loaded so that you could get to this location in the first place. So what that will mean for the sim is that when it's in this folder and associated with this scenario, you have to actually load that scenario to see your placement. Obviously you don't want that. You want to be able to load this airport from any condition and still be able to see your buildings. So what you can do is give it a name, and then assuming you're done placing things, you can just quit SimDirector and go to your folder, go to your documents folder under the prepared v4 files, and you'll see the placement BGL you just created. You can take that, copy it, and drag it into your scenery folder, or better yet, cut it and take it out of documents altogether. Put it in your root scenery folder for your project, and then it will act like a normal placement BGL. So it's not terribly complicated. It's just a little wonky to use and takes some time to start up, but it works, and it's pretty effective.